Okay, this is going to be a review for the second quarter end of term assessment that we're taking this Friday. It won't take real long. There's about 13 slides here that covers what you're going to see on the test. How does latitude affect climate? We talked about this back at the beginning of the year. We know that the Earth is warmest near the equator, which is right there at the center of the Earth. Anywhere along the equator from the Tropic of Cancer down to the Tropic of Capricorn, this area of the Earth is always going to be the warmest because it gets the most direct sunlight. And we know that the Earth is coldest at the North and South poles. Because again, based on the shape of the Earth, these poles get the least amount of direct sunlight, and direct sunlight equals energy, which equals heat. So again, the poles are cold, and along the equator, above and below the equator, we get hot temperatures all year round. Cultural diversity. What is cultural diversity? It's people of different cultures living together in the same place. For example, the United States is very culturally diverse. We have people from different countries with different religious backgrounds, different cultural beliefs, all living in the same place. We are probably the most culturally diverse country in the world. A country like Japan, for example, is not very culturally diverse. About 98% of its people are of Japanese descent. There's not a lot of difference when it comes to culture in Japan. But in our country, and in our city, and in our school here at Fagley, we're very culturally diverse. Population density. And this picture illustrates what it means to be population dense. A whole lot of people in one small area. So population density is the number of people living in one place. Lots of people in one place equals population dense. Big cities like Chicago, New York City, Paris, London, Los Angeles, they're going to be considered population dense. They have a lot of people living in one place. In contrast, if you go out into the country, into a rural community, a place where there's lots of farmland, for example, where very few people live, maybe there's one house and a mile later you have another house, a mile later you have another house, that's an example of not being very population dense. Portage falls in the middle of all that. We're not a big city like Chicago. We don't have a lot of people jammed in on top of each other. We don't have lots of apartment buildings, lots of skyscrapers. But we're also not like Couts or Wheatfield, which are sort of out in the country where there's lots of farmland and there's a lot more space between houses. So we sort of fall in the middle of population density. We're not super population dense, but we're not have as little population density as a small farming community might. Literacy rate simply means people's ability to read and write. So when we use the term rate, literacy rate then becomes the percentage, how many people out of 100 of the population that can read and write. And the higher your literacy rate, generally speaking, the better off the country is. Developed nations like the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, for example, Japan, they have high literacy rates. Developing nations, like many of the nations in South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, have very low literacy rates. Democracy is a form of government that began in ancient Greece in the city-state of Athens. And the idea of democracy is that citizens vote for the leaders and they vote for new laws. This is, again, the type of government we have in our country. We have a democracy. We're democratic. You hear those terms all the time. And it means that the people have freedom and the people have the ability to vote for leaders and sometimes even vote for laws. Europe is surrounded by, well, we're talking about bodies of water here, big bodies of water. So we want to make sure that we know that Europe, the continent of Europe, is surrounded by the Arctic Ocean above to the north, the Atlantic Ocean to the west, and the Mediterranean Sea to the south. The Mediterranean Sea separates the continent of Africa from the continent of Europe. So the Arctic Ocean above, the Atlantic Ocean to the left, the Mediterranean Sea to the south. The Scandinavian Peninsula, we know that a peninsula is a piece of land that juts out into the water, surrounded by water on three sides. The state of Florida is a great example of a peninsula. And we had talked about the Iberian peninsulas and the Italian peninsula in Europe. But the Scandinavian Peninsula is in northern Europe. And it's made up of two countries, Norway and Sweden. So it's this piece right here on the map that sticks down surrounded by water on 3 sides. Okay, and we've got the countries of Norway and Sweden. That's the Scandinavian peninsula. If you hear someone say that they're from Scandinavia, that means they're from either Norway or Sweden, one of those 2 countries. The fall of the Roman Empire, a couple of reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire had a series of bad, corrupt leaders. The empire became too big to control. They didn't have enough soldiers to protect the borders. And there's an example of one of the Roman centurions in Lego form. There was an increase of poverty and unemployment in the Roman Empire, which led people to be less loyal to the empire. And finally, the empire was invaded by barbarians from the north, people that they had conquered in the past, who realized that there weren't enough soldiers to protect the Roman Empire's borders, and they started to fight back. And they fought their way all the way to Rome and eventually conquered the city and burned the city. Christianity is a religion that began during the Roman Empire. Christians were originally persecuted by the Romans. They were arrested, they were thrown in jail, they were sometimes killed for their beliefs, but eventually, towards the end of the Roman Empire, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And Christianity was the religion that held Europe together after the Roman Empire fell. It was one of the few things that kept the people of Europe feeling connected to each other after the fall of the Roman Empire as we move into the Middle Ages. The feudal system is also something from the Middle Ages. It involved kings, nobles, knights, and peasants. And in its most simple way of thinking of it is that it's an exchange of land for military service. And this graphic shows how at the top of this pyramid we have the king. The king takes the land that is his, and he divides it up among, in this graphic it says tenants and chiefs, but those would be the nobles, the people that were wealthy. The nobles would then take their piece of land, take the best piece for themselves, and divide the rest up among their knights. Each one of those knights then would hire peasants to work the land. And the peasants were the lowest people in the feudal system, and their job was to do the farming. They didn't really make much money. They simply were given a place to stay on the manor, and they were given a small plot of land to farm for themselves to grow food for their families. And in return, they had to farm for the knights or the nobles. The Black Death is also known as the bubonic plague. It's a disease that swept through Europe from 1347 to 1351, spread by fleas that were carried on rats, but the fleas would jump onto people and bite them, giving them the disease. It could also be passed person to person. By the end of the Black Death, estimates are between 1/3 and 2/3 of Europe's population had died. After the plague had ended, life was better for the survivors. There was more food and there was more work, so the jobs that were available paid more because there was less people fighting to get those jobs, and there was more food for the people that survived. Before the plague, Europe had been pretty overcrowded. After the plague, for those that were fortunate enough to have survived, things got a lot better. Magna Carta was a document written by nobles in England. They asked King John of England to sign it. And the point of the Magna Carta, the big thing I want you to remember, is that it limits the power of the king. It kept the king from doing whatever he wanted to just because he was the king. The Magna Carta became the foundation for many of the laws in England and later on many of the laws of the United States. Our country is based on ideas that involve no one having too much power in our government. Our president, for example, doesn't have total power. His power is limited and shared with Congress and with the judicial branch, the Supreme Court. So the Magna Carta, big things we want to remember is that its goal was to limit the king's power. Okay, and that's it. If you know these things, if you watch this video a couple of times, pause it, take a look at it. Hopefully some of the pictures will help make connections in your brain to these ideas. But if you are confident that you know the things in these 12 slides, you'll do really well on our test on Friday.